We are on the homeland of the Dakota people, and that is of the utmost importance. But you must also recognize the way colonization and colonial settlerism have affected all Indigenous people here in Minnesota and all across this country and all across the world. The effects of that brutal displacement are all around us. You must also recognize that Indigenous people are very much still here today, and that there is so much profound work happening in our communities for our present moment, for acknowledging a history that will always be, and toward, emphasis on toward, a bright tomorrow. Birch Bark Books, Dream of Wild Health, the Indian Women's Resource Center, All My Relations Art Gallery, the newly opened American Indian Center on Franklin Avenue. These are just but a few places where that work is happening. So, as you're here, and as you leave this evening, when you go back out there, remember these places and find even more places where this wonderful work is happening. And see the beauty of Indigenous lives all around us here and now. That is that. I will now introduce Debra's editor and Milkweed Editions CEO and publisher, Daniel Slager.
Thanks very much, Anthony, and good evening. Great to see so many of you here on a beautiful spring evening. I'm really excited to be here, not least because these are two of my favorite living authors, and I've been looking to this event, forward to this event for weeks, so it's really exciting to be here. As Anthony mentioned, my name is Daniel Slager. I'm the publisher at Milkweed Editions, and we are the proud publisher of two novels by Debra Magpie Earling, Perma-Red and The Lost Journals of Sacajawea, which is just out in paperback. I'd like to begin with just a few items of note before turning the microphone over to Debra and Louise. I'd like to acknowledge that the work we do at Milkweed Editions is made possible by the voters of Minnesota through a Minnesota State Arts Board operating support grant, which is thanks to a legislative appropriation from the Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. I would also like to extend a huge thank you to the teams at Birch Bark Books and the Minneapolis Central Library. You are both essential elements of our literary ecosystem here in the Twin Cities, and it's been our pleasure to work with you to bring this event to fruition. Before inviting Debra to the stage then, I'm deeply honored to introduce both Debra and Louise, who will be joining Debra in conversation after Debra reads. Debra Magpie Earling is the author of The Lost Journals of Sacajawea and Perma-Red. She's received a National Endowment for the Arts grant, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and the Montana Book Award. She retired from the University of Montana, where she was named Professor Emeritus in 2021. Debra is Bitterroot Salish. Louise Erdrich, a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Chippewa, is the author of many novels as well as volumes of poetry, children's books, and a memoir of early motherhood. Her novel, The Roundhouse, won the National Book Award for Fiction. Love Medicine and La Rose received the National Book Critics Circle Award for Fiction. And The Night Watchman won the Pulitzer Prize, of course, in fiction. One of America's great living authors, right here in Minneapolis. Louise lives here in Minneapolis with her daughters and is the owner of Birch Bark Books, which is a wonderful independent bookstore, as I'm sure all of you know. Thanks again very much to all of you for making time for this event this evening. And now, please help me welcome Debra Magpie Earling.
Okay, this story, Louise, I met you when I was 27
Okay.
in graduate school.
Okay. We can just like.
Where we just go right into just.
Yeah, we've known each other. Well, we knew each other in past lives,
Yes.
so we're pretty sure that we've known each other for, eons.
Yeah.
right?
Yes. And I was always so jealous that you stole my first story.
Yeah.
Like,
What?
actually, one of my teachers, the late Colleen, now her name is escaping me.
Yeah.
She called me into her office and she said, because she knew I was working on Perma-Red, and it was about my Aunt Louise.
Mm-hmm.
And she knew this story and all that. So she said, I think you should read this book. Louise Erdrich has has already written this story that you're writing.
Oh no.
And I was like, I had the deer story in this.
Oh, you had.
I had a deer story so similar to what you had. And she says, oh, I think you have to change this. And then she told me this story, and I love this, and I think it's true. She says, Debra, remember, if any of you are writers out here, creative people are doing stuff or have big ideas, she said she believed that, it's Colleen McElroy, she believed that creativity was this great pink cloud in the universe, and then every once in a while it'll come down to earth and it'll smear here and here and here. But she said it's all at the same time. So when you get a big idea, write as fast as you can. Somebody else has the idea. So while I was dawdling around with my, which I was a great American novel, while I was dawdling around with that,
This interview's over. That's so great.
I was like, come on. I didn't really like you at first. It was like, I know you don't believe this, but she stole my novel. But we never met or anything.
Well, see,
She got smeared first, I guess.
in so many ways, that's true. It just so many ways. Yeah. Where do we go from here? This is like a revelation.
Well, I want to say, because I'm sorry, you probably know this, but you're like a superstar. It's like a celebrity, and so I think people don't know. You're such a kind and loving person. You're such a generous person. And the first time that I met Louise, I mean, the very first time that I met her, she said I was a Ford predoctoral fellow at Cornell, and I was heading to DC to, they had the Ford conference, and so I was heading to DC for that. And I said, I'm sorry, I can't stay. I have to make a really early flight tomorrow. And she said, well, we're giving a reading tomorrow night, and why don't you show up? And I was so dumb. I mean, geez. And she was reading at the Folger Shakespeare Library, and you and Michael Dorse were reading, and you said, come and bring your friends. I was like, okay, I'll come and bring my friends. And so we were knocking around all day in DC, and then we show up, and so there's this really fancy woman with platinum hair and those long platinum fingernails. And we go up to her and we say, we were invited to come to this event. And she looked at me, and I think Teddy Kennedy was there. Ted Kennedy. And there was Miss American Congress was there. There was all these dignitaries, and they were so fancy. And they were lined up, and she said, I don't see you on the list. And she goes, why don't you wait over there? And so I thought, and my friends were going, are we really invited here? Should we be here? Looks really fancy. And then you guys drove up. And it was a limousine. And there were paparazzi. Do you remember this?
No.
And I was like, oh my God, she really is famous. Let's get out of here. And so we were leaving. And I think it's Michael grabbed me and said, welcome. And then you were like, welcome, Debra. Do you remember this? And then this woman came up with the platinum, and you'd never met me. And the woman with the platinum hair saw this, and then she goes, oh, well, wait over there. And I thought they were going to put out fold-out chairs or something. Do you know with your generosity, we were invited past Ted Kennedy, past Miss American Indian Congress, past all these really fancy people. And I have never felt so, I wasn't comfortable in graduate school. I wasn't comfortable in the setting that I was in. I dropped out of high school at 15. I got married at 17. Had a terrible time. And to have your generosity and your spirit with me from the very beginning and just being so loving and welcoming, I never forgot it. I have tried to be that generous to all the people that I meet because of you. So thank you for that.
Oh, okay. Well, um, I don't, I'm not really that nice, but for, for one shining moment, I was really, I remembered being, I was like dice to the best person who would become my sister and basically my twin in terms of, thank you. Thank you so much. All right. Should we just stare into each other's eyes?
Okay, you've got to tell a story.
I've got to tell.
Yeah. Do you have a story?
I-
You have a million stories, but
I do, but
you want to talk about? Okay.
I really want to tell this. I'll find a story while we're talking, but I'm so excited about this book. Yeah, this is, and I'm excited that we have a press here that was visionary in the way that you're visionary and brought this book out in the way you wanted to bring it out. I have a bunch of questions here, but
Yeah.
I'm just going to say a couple of things before that I have never, I basically grew up with a descendant of Sacajawea. And I'm going to say it like,
Yeah.
most people say Sacajawea, but Sacajawea. And I didn't know any of it, any of what, I really didn't understand that hers was a story of abduction until I was reading this and I thought, wait, I'm permeated with the same mythos that everybody else is. Yeah. And so, first of all, I want to talk to you about what caused you to take this into your artistic being and to bring it out. I think it's been in different iterations and that you've been working on this for a long time and where it came from. And then I have another question after that. I have many questions, but where did it come from?
Well, gosh, that's a really good question. I think there's many things, but there's many. The historian Alvin Giuseppe asked me to write about Lewis and Clark through Indian eyes, like the Salish version, and I felt like I'd always screwed that up, like because I was so fascinated with when you sit with those journals and you try to read through them. One of the things that I discovered was there was one really shocking moment, and I was on stage with N. Scott Momaday and some very distinguished people from Nez Perce. And this woman came to the stage and she said, I want to ask you, what would you write if you could write anything about Lewis and Clark? And there was one incident where, and this was in November of 1804 on a really dark night, a man, Mandan man, had given his wife for dark nights to Sergeant Ordway for the evening, hoping that she would be able to pass her power actually through her vagina when she returned to him, that he would get some of her power, some of Ordway, some of this great, like these men with their big guns. So something went awry. He was jealous of her. He was jealous of Ordway, and he stabbed her and beat her badly. She ended up at the interpreter's campfire. And I was like, I sat with that and I thought, it doesn't say Sacajawea, but it wasn't Charbonneau. And it wasn't any of the other, it was actually Sacajawea who was tending to this woman.
Yeah.
And I thought about the wake of, whenever there's any kind of encroachment, it's the women and children who really suffer. And that's what really haunted me, was what happened to this woman afterwards, and what the heck happened to Sacajawea, that she was witness at the edge of, what they call civilization, which was at the edge of the destruction, and actually the movement upward into the very canal, the very entrance, the entryway into the womb of the West. And there she was, standing at the precipice of that, holding these stories, seeing what these no longer, I don't think, were warriors, but war men who'd been really curdled and tainted by all these white traders who were coming through and just wanting more and more, and what it would get them, what it would buy them. There was something that was really wicked that was happening. And I thought about her and her child, what that must have been like to be with a man you didn't want to be with. He was much older than you, and you were raped by him, and you had a child, and you had to take that child with you on a journey up the river. 32 men. I think she was like 13 or 14 years old. White history will tell you that she was 16. They have no way to prove this, but everybody, I don't know, was there a convention of historians that got together and said 17, she was born in 1787, so that makes her 12, that makes her, let's see, 16 by the time that they arrived, so that's kind of okay, right? That she was right, but it's not. I think she was much younger, because I think that date really, really forgives a lot of, covers up and makes things seem a little wholesome, doesn't it? Like the manifest destiny, it kind of encourages that whole idea, but when you think that this girl was raped and that she was carrying a child, and some historians actually believe that Charbonneau was trying to sell her to the men as they were traveling, so she had to be in the lodge with Lewis and Clark. She had to sleep with Charbonneau, she wasn't sleeping with Lewis and Clark, but she was in their lodge every night so she could be protected. Think about how, and at one point in the story, this is in the journals, and I thought, why didn't I hear this before? But they stop on the river, and all these men, and they're hooting and hollering over these grizzly bears copulating, and they're getting their jollies off of this event. And I thought, what would that be like to be a girl with a baby, and these men have stopped at something that you're just like right there.
Right.
So,
Right.
yeah.
As you were talking, I was thinking, one of the iconic Sacajawea pictures is always of her. She's on the coin, she's in everything, with her baby Jean Baptiste on her back, and you have several times in this baby is heavy, and she's carrying this baby is big, he's heavy, and she's a very young woman. think probably 13, 14 at most.
Yeah.
And she's carrying this baby. And, the guys are carrying a gun, whatever they're carrying. But that she's doing this, she's doing an amazing feat. It's not just, oh, she points something out, she does this or does that, but she's carrying a child with her. Anybody who's carried children knows they get really heavy after about one city block. It's like
Put this baby down now.
it's like they get really big, like bigger and bigger. Yeah. So that, and so many things in this book I really didn't think about, and I didn't think about it from her point of view. But one thing that I really wanted to talk to you about, because this is what makes the book, it takes the book from a story of a woman who's resilient, who's been abducted, but who's resilient, who's making her way through all of this. It takes it into another level, is your use of language all through this book. And from the very beginning, and this is why I mentioned milkweed, your decision to use the type in order to talk about her inner life. So can you give, there's rules in the beginning, and I love that. Can you kind of tell us a little bit about the rules of your language, type use?
I felt like that wasn't my choice. I tried to use ellipses to stall time but it just didn't work. And I thought, well, of course it doesn't work, because it would have to be a heartbeat. And why does punctuation have to always go like colonize punctuation or something? But I thought, if I'm going to have a pause, it's like a heartbeat or a drum beat.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought there's stories in repetition, in Native stories. And, some of the anthropologists, including Kroeber, when he sent his, young anthropologists out to gather stories from Native people, he told them, this is redundancy. Stop these repetitions. They've said it once, you don't have to repeat it.
Yeah.
And what he did was effectively gut so many of these powerful stories. So if you're listening to an elder and they say, a woman went down to the river, I'm like, oh, okay, a woman went down to the river. But if they say, a woman went down to the river, and then it gets your attention, and then if they say, a woman went down to the river, and then there's a transformation that occurs when it's a woman went down to the river, and that something sacred has happened, something has changed. And how do you get that across to people who are non-native, that something is changing in the atmosphere? So I thought, what if it was like a heartbeat when she's afraid of things, or a drum beat, da-dum, 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 like her footsteps on the earth. And one of the things I thought, well, I just felt like she wouldn't want me to not think about things that were sacred to her once she, it became her own language. Like, so, there's some words that are inutterable or unutterable in many languages, the sacred words, they can't be spoken. And so she keeps those words, but they become gray instead of they're whispered.
I love that.
Mhm.
I love that, because it really, it's just enough so you can read it very easily, but it's faint enough so that you take your breath in and you can go, there's something happening here. There's a spirit happening. There's something coming in. It gives me a chill every so often, and it should, because that's, as you say, in the beginning, before and all through, she is someone who is so connected in with everything that's around her. You say that she doesn't really have, and you convey this, that she's so part of her world that there's a fluidity, and it's having it reflected. And there's capitalizations too.
Oh, you know, we always capitalize something that's important, and I thought, well, trees and water and river and salmon, you know, aga is important. So, and white man is important. In the beginning, white man is just the name that she has for a particular white man, but white man is always capitalized until she realizes that they don't deserve her respect. So it goes to diminutive. Like after she hears what they say about women, the words that they use for
Right.
women, how they denigrate women, then they're no longer, you know. But I think about her, Louise, and I was just, you know, I wrote this. This is terrible to say, but I wrote this story gleefully. It was like I just this voice was kind of pushing me, and I kind of wrote it gleefully, and then I wrote it, and then I didn't. It wasn't like I wanted to go back and correct it. I wanted a rawness to it. I didn't want it to be pretty. Some of the language is really jumbled. When you read it, it's not like poetry. I didn't want it to be, you know, like, you will come to a wide river, you will see big waters. You know, I didn't want it to be that. I really wanted it to be broken in some ways, to be stuttered. And sometimes she stops in her life and is just overwhelmed by things. So the language isn't always there for her, and she tries to just the basic things like I see this, or something that's really simple. And you realize when you start seeing the world from that view, it really becomes more complex than, you know, because it's like it stops you and says, oh, the thing itself. I'm seeing the thing itself and trying to understand beauty, trying to understand what my ancestors and what our ancestors saw years ago and thought, oh, isn't that beautiful? Isn't that beautiful? And I don't think there's anyone, including Native people, there might be, but in the audience, or you even, who would say a buffalo that fell into the river in the winter, broke through and then bloated up, you know, 4 times its size and was floating down. They called the buffalo meat bottle green. They described it as bottle green, soft flesh, the smell of it, like the gases rising. And these people would run down to the river to get these buffalo. They were so excited.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, of course, it must have tasted so sweet. And it wasn't like they didn't have to procure this. They didn't have to go out and shoot the buffalo. They didn't have to do anything, but it was a gift, like a great gift, and it was a rare delicacy and something to be celebrated. Like, here's food from the animals, from the river itself, and how beautiful that is when the traders were like throwing up, like they couldn't even bear the smell or the sight of it. But then you think about, what is it that we see that is beautiful in this world? Like, we've been conditioned, I think, so all of us have been conditioned to think that things are beautiful only in one way. And we really listen to that, you know? There's so often like, I'll look at myself in the mirror and go, oh no. But I think like, you think about that beauty of the old ways, what they really saw. So.
You said this, if there was only one story or one way of seeing things, all stories would die. I loved that. And I wanted to write it, I wanted to read some of your your descriptive words, just because to give people an idea of what's in this. So, bliss ruckus, I think that's sex. Your bliss ruckus, gatter, rudel, whistlebone, badger claw voice, griddled kidney, curdled liver, fiddlebits, tittlebits, it's tittlebits, and scrittering, and it goes on and on. That's just from 2 pages, 1 page or 2 pages. Yeah, and the whole book has this kind of, this sense that you're in a new place in this book. You're seeing this child who is now a mother, and her wonder and horror and everything else, and this language is taking you there by confusing you and making you it's not confusing you because you know exactly what everything means. It's new. That's all. It's just fantastically new.
Sorry, I just want to go in the corner and digest this, like Louise Erdrich, who's like
That's what
the
I was
goddess
doing when you were talking about me. We can't
Native
do
American
this.
literature, is telling me this. The friend,
I was
okay.
feeling like I wanted to crawl off this stage when you were telling me in the beginning that I was a nice person.
Little does she know.
No. Oh, God. Well, at one point, my ears perked up because Sacajawea pounded together decayed elk spleen and ants and made a poison that would kill the devil. I was like, yeah. I'm sure that she did it, but did you is this a
It's
real poison?
It is a real poison. Yeah, it is a poison. But the thing that I find,
So everybody make note. Because arsenic is easily traceable.
if you don't behave, I think what's really interesting is like there's all these nice terms for women. The grass widow, like she's waiting in the grass for that white man to return. There's all these passive kind of women, Native women waiting for these white men, Native women tending to these white men. I thought there was nothing passive about these women. They thought of ways, they knew the traditional ways, and they could make your shit sting.
Oh,
They
yeah,
could
that's
make
good.
you, they could do things to you, and like if you didn't like something, they could easily and gladly, poison you in small ways to make your life miserable. So not kill you, but you kind of knew. I just
They
don't
could
believe
shut
that
you
women
down.
passively
Yeah.
said, "Okay, I'm just gonna lay down and be your wife." That just doesn't sound true to me. But you know what?
not
It
true.
wasn't like Louise. It wasn't like I'm like a really smart historian or something and I figured this out or I broke it. It was like this story presented itself to me from the very beginning. I mean, I wrote a piece with Peter Koch. I wrote a piece for the Missoula Art Museum in response to some Native artists' work. And I was like, I don't want to do this. I hate Lewis and Clark. And I appreciate the Native artists who've done the work for this, but I don't want to do this. And they said, please, the other person who wrote for us was writing for us dropped out, so please help us. And so
Nobody else wants to do it.
It wasn't like, it wasn't like, Debra, we really admire you. It wasn't anything like that. And so I said, okay, I'll help you out. I'll do it. And I sat down in a coffee shop, and the first thing that came to me was the Lost Journals of Sacajawea. And I went through that like with a fury. I swear it wasn't anything that I even wrote. There's times when I did make decisions or that I did make selections, but there are times, and you know this from writing, there are gifts. These stories come to you, and you may try to fight them or but wrestle them, and they tell you the story.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were looking for a passage that I can't find, and you couldn't find it.
I couldn't find it either. So can you read the passage that you decided to?
Yeah,
To read?
I was telling Louise, okay, this passage doesn't want to be found, and I can probably tell you the story about it. But I wanted to read a piece that I felt really. This book isn't something that necessarily makes me feel comfortable, I don't feel really comfortable in some of the stories that are told in this, because years ago, before I even thought about writing this story, you know how you dream of someone, they keep coming to you.
Yeah.
And this old woman kept coming to me, and she was in the earth itself, and she lived out by the menstrual huts. And I was like, why am I dreaming of this old woman? And she'd say, go tell the warriors I want mirrors, give me mirrors. And I realized she was blind. And she wanted the mirrors so she could see, and so she could see the water spirits. And she said, and anyone coming up the river. She wanted to keep, and I kept dreaming of this woman. And so she shows up in this, and she was the one who said, you know, do not let anyone tell you there is only one story. And it was, and so I was talking to a friend of mine who's Hadadza, and she said, well, it is the woman who never died, the sky spirit. She goes, she comes to me, and I read this passage to her, and she said, she cried, and she said, oh, she came to you. But I don't claim that. But I do know unmistakably that I was haunted by this person, this character. And then I thought, I better read up on, I know nothing about, I'm writing about this, and I don't know about Mandan. I didn't want to write about their ceremonies. I open up this book on Mandan ceremonies. The first thing that I come to is the woman who never died. But when she'd come to me, she would say, I am the woman who has always lived. And she didn't want death, but I kept thinking, well, maybe I should make her the woman who's, you know, and I think I used that at one point, the woman who never died. And she returns in the story and says, I am the woman who has always lived. And this book had that kind of resonance for me. You know, I tried to get rid of it. Like, I was like,
Yeah.
okay, I'm done with you, Sacajawea. The book is published. Okay, I'm just going to go on my own way. And as soon as I did, I got this email from one of my colleagues at the University of Montana. They said, hey, would you be interested? My great-grandfather wrote something about Sacajawea, and I'd like you to have it. My sister and I would like for you to have it. And I go, yeah, sure, I'll go. I'd like to have it, I guess. So I go there, and he hands me this Albertson plastic bag, and in the bag is this the old manuscript that's never been published. His grandfather, great-grandfather, was the superintendent on the Wind River Reservation shortly after Sacajawea died, which claims that she lived on the reservation to be in her 80s when it refutes all of the information that she died at the age of 23 in Fort Manuel of putrid fever. But there was another woman, Grace Hebert, who said this. She lived, and she credits this Chester for this information. But if any of you are scholars, I finally said, I need to let this go. I need to go on a path. And so the family called me and said, we want to get this going. I said, because they gave it to me and then they took it back. And I was like, all right, I understand this story. I've been through this story. So I went with them, and they presented it to the archives at the University of Montana. They're going to dismantle this book and digitize it so it'll be available to everyone. But if you're a scholar, a historian, this is the real deal. Never been published. The paper is brittle and crackly. So if you want to go before, it's in the queue to be digitized, but it won't be for probably a couple months more. So if you want to go to the University of Montana and find that in the archives,
And that
I
pink
urge you
cloud
to
is
do.
out there. You got to
Yeah.
be smeared.
It's out there. You better go
Better
get
get
it.
that-
But
get-
I thought,
go
you
get
know,
it.
you can make a name
Yeah.
for yourself. Yeah. There, that paper cloud.
Yeah.
Get it before Louise gets it.
Yeah. Let's take off.
So intrigued by. Okay, I totally lost the train of thought.
You were going to
Oh,
read.
I was going to read.
You were
Okay.
going to read it.
See, I thought I could get away with.
You have to read
I'm sorry. Sometimes I remember when I was young, I loved to read. I would get all dressed up. I'd like really fancy cowboy boots, my hair curled, my whole like, and then and then you read and read and read. I was like, no, yeah. So let's see. I'll go up to the podium because then I don't.
That's
have to help.
good.
So I tried to find the other passage, and the old woman who's always lived wanted me to, I guess, to read this part. So here it is. Through smoke, glimmer, haze, I see an old woman cover herself with a blanket made of leaves. Beside her, campfire, lit sky. Old woman's eyes are liver sheen. She is blind. Mirrors flash on her moccasins, on her head kerchief, on her dress made of sagebrush. Small wind eddies around her with a scent like sunrise water. Long little click of blue fly, root prayer, heart blood. What are you running from? She asks. I am quiet. She drops her blanket. Faces move over her mirror dress. I see otter woman crying, a lie beside arrow beside her. Dubai breaks over fields where they walk. Look closely, she says. Her voice chimes branches in high forests, blows ice grass whistles. I see water. Waves and waves of water. Remember, she tells me, remember what you see. You will long to see it again. I do not wish to see water. I wish to see blue elk. Old woman cups both hands beneath her breasts. Mirrors blind, chicker, and I see blue-black shining hair. Blue elk. I see blue elk. Can he see me? She laughs. No, she says. Has she come to take me back to a man who plagues us? Charbonneau? No. I like old grunt better. Oof is awful. These are names that Sacajawea has for him. I like old grunt better. Oof is awful, but true. Old woman lifts her blind eyes too weak to buy. It will rain. Good, she says. She wobbles to standing. When we enter deep dark woods, she does not walk in darkness. Her mirrors catch light, water glare, trees shine, stone polish, puddle glint, glass sparkle. Trees sigh as we pass. It is so dark in the woods, red spots dance beside me. I walk in a fawn mule of blindness. Now Oppie was right, she says. Weta is all around. I do not ask how she knows. When old woman speaks, mirrors catch days long gone. Ape, Bia. In one mirror, white crow walks with old woman. Her face flitters from mirror to mirror. Alive. Unbroken white crow. Old woman goes on walking. Long ago is not long ago, she says. Her voice breaks like birdsong. Long ago is with us now, as are the days that lead ahead.
Okay, we have time for a quick Q&A with the authors, actually. So if you raise your hand, I can bring the mic to you. Hi, Debra. I'm over here. Actually, I own a bookstore in Bayfield, Wisconsin, and Louise has been there. Honest Talk Books, yeah. And we read your book this winter as part of we had a One Tough Broad reading club, and I got to select the 3 books, and The Lost Journals was one of them. And I can say you've given booksellers definitely a challenge with that book. And I'd love to hear Louise's response to how she sells it to customers. Because what we've come up with is, and I think I just told this guy here, it's brutal, but you need to read it. And I read in an interview where you said this is either going to turn Western mythology on its head or people are going to ignore it. And I just can't even think about Western mythology the same, or Lewis and Clark. And I'm wondering what you feel about that now that it's been out a year. Has it started discussions that you think? Do you think? I think this is going to be a really important book, and we're going to look back to it as the beginning of a discussion about Western mythology and why we need it and why we cling to it. And I'm just wondering where that discussion is right now.
That's a good question. You know, by no means is this book or any book definitive. But I that's what I wanted was for the discussion to begin, and I'm so grateful to Milkweed and to Daniel Slager in particular. And he he actually he actually came to my reading in Missoula when like he came to the debut, and he said uh, to my family, to everyone, and said, "This is not an easy book to read." And I've stood in like I got to be with Justin Torres in Portland and read with him and Stacy Flood, and the woman who was escorting us on stage said, "Well, I read a lot, and I couldn't get through this." And I've had so many people say, "I fought this book and I fought it. I fought it because I thought it was supposed to read this way." And once and I've had so many people tell me this, once I surrendered and just let the voice go, then I had a whole different experience. But I believe that writers are, you know, if given a chance, like Milkweed offers us a chance to write something that is meaningful in the way that which we want to write it, then then readers will step up to the challenge. I just believe that readers real readers love a challenge, right? Like trying to crack something and trying to, oh, understand it. And the satisfaction that comes with feeling like you're part of something. And that's like in my culture, in Bitterroot Salish, the most important thing is when somebody says, I become a part of it. You know, I have become a part of it. And it's part of you, part of your culture, part of the story that's told. And I think Leslie Marmon Silko has talked about the importance and power of story and the importance of everyone telling their stories. So it's kind of a trust and respect that readers who are, so, I believe, so sensitive will pick up on this. But I have to say, I think it's just hand by hand. And somebody just recently told me, they said, you have a lot of really powerful people behind you, like with handing out this book, giving that book. And I thought, Louise. Yeah, I did. I thought Louise. And then I got this message, which I was thrilled when I woke up one morning. I checked my little messages on Facebook, and I had a message from Joy Harjo. And she was like, I'm sorry I didn't learn your book. I have children and great grandchildren. I've been really busy, but I want to say uh, thank you. And there's so many of us who are behind you and support this book. And I want to say I tell everyone to read it. So I thought, well, maybe just slowly and surely it'll get out there. It is a story I think that I didn't see coming. It's not like I read it or that I read the material and saw this coming. It was like a revelation to me, you know. And when I sat with it, when I really listen, why did I listen to these people? I can't believe it. You know, I feel like when Louise and I were in Paris, um, but, like, there's there's this idea that I remember having, I think I stayed like 2 weeks longer than you or something, and I don't speak French, but I had to sink or swim, and I had to start really listening to what people were saying to understand. And I thought, why did we listen to this non-native historian saying that she didn't speak or understand English or that she didn't understand French? she understood these languages. The native languages are tough. She understood Hidatsa and Mandan and could speak she knew all of the nuances. And I thought she must have laughed so hard. I mean, kept herself like when she would tell Charbonneau something in Hidatsa. He didn't speak Hidatsa well, but he kind of thought he understood. So he would translate to another person who spoke French. He'd like change it from Hidatsa into French. And then that person would change French into English. And I thought it must have been they must have been saying the craziest stuff. I just like to think of I just like to think of her going behind, going behind a tree and just laughing about the crazy things that they were saying, because there is no way that she did not understand that language. So I'm hoping with that long-winded, answer, I'm hoping that people will try to learn like this kind of cultural language, a new way of seeing things, which is just down to the very basics, I think.
Yeah, I think you're being humble about how transformative this is, and that you're saying, oh, it's difficult or something. By page 6, you are absorbed into this story. I think people are ready for this. And I think that if you, Honest Dog Books, how do you want to sell this? Just say, you've never read anything like this before. Prepare yourself. The language is different. The concept is it's such a game changer for history. You're going to love it. Go through to the end, and then you get this beautiful passage that you read, and you start hearing that every story is different, or there wouldn't be stories. That it has to be this way.
I think that's a beautiful place to end it, actually.
Okay.
Thank you guys so much
Well,
for coming. Thank you, Debra and Louise.